38 past the hour. Welcome back. Joining us now from Allentown, Pennsylvania, Republican Senator Pat Toomey. Welcome back to the show, Senator.
Morning, guys.
I'm going to read from Red State. Eric Erickson wrote this about you. Tom Coburn, Ron Johnson, and Pat Toomey should be ashamed. He says this: Tom Coburn cares about the size and scope of federal government. So do Ron Johnson and Pat Toomey. But they just voted for a tax increase with legislation that was not even publicly available. In other words, they voted for a law that was not even written for them to review. Coburn, Johnson, and Toomey might console themselves into thinking they'll now have leverage with the debt ceiling, but their colleagues have already proven themselves unserious on spending cuts. And
Pat, Charles Krauthammer called last night a, quote, complete surrender. I agree with Charles Krauthammer. What say you, sir?
All right, Pat.
Well, first of all, I think there's one slight detail that Dan Sr. has been trying to make and has been otherwise generally overlooked, and that is the existing law that was on the books. The fact is, this is a very unusual circumstance to have a law that gives the president what he really wants, which was a tax increase. Now, we could have said, fine, we're just going to raise tax, allow taxes to go up on all Americans. I thought that's a bad idea. I don't think you can solve this problem with tax increases. So what we did is we spared as many Americans as we possibly could from a tax increase, and we never had any leverage on spending. I want to correct something that Congressman Van Hollen said. The president's proposal, if you remember, was over $1 trillion in tax increases, and then the $1 trillion in so-called spending cuts, which were never specified, were going to turn off the sequester for 10 years. There was no spending cut, and by the way, the president also wanted an unlimited debt ceiling increase. That was clearly somebody who was quite happy to go over the fiscal cliff. Our opportunity here is on the debt ceiling. The president's made it very clear. He doesn't even want to have a discussion about it because he knows this is where we have leverage. We Republicans need to be willing to tolerate a temporary partial government shutdown, which is what that could mean, and insist that we get off the road to Greece, because that's a road we're on right now. We only can solve this problem by getting spending under control and restructuring the entitlement programs. No, there is no tax solution to this. Right. It's a spending solution. And this president doesn't want to go there. We're going to have to force it, and we're going to have to force it over the debt ceiling.
All right, so Pat, I can't agree with you on one point, and that is that we have been overlooking Dan Sr., but he's so easily ignored.
I tend to make an effort to.
Slack on that one. Mark Alpert.
Senator, I want to pursue this.
He's the guy who's been right.
All right, Mark and then Sam.
Yeah, right, if you like raising taxes and $4 trillion.
We cut taxes.
Go ahead.
Right in a Ryan kind of.
Senator, I want to pursue this debt ceiling issue with you. You said it could cause a government shutdown, but it could also cause a downgrade of U.S. credit. It could cause market chaos.
Let's talk about
Are you willing to do all of those things in order to use that leverage if the president says that's not part of the debate?
Let me tell you what, I am absolutely convinced that the downgrade and the chaos comes when the market sees an unwillingness to solve the fundamental, unsustainable fiscal situation that we're in. That's the problem. A temporary disruption because we have to furlough the workers at the Department of Education or close down some national parks or not cut the grass on the mall. You know, that's not optimal. It's disruptive. But it's a hell of a lot better than the path that we're on and the crisis we're going to have if we think that we can just keep giving this president unlimited debt. Look, you know, he got a $2 trillion debt limit increase just 17 months ago, blew through all that. And there's another thing I want to correct, which is this notion somehow that giving the president additional debt limit increase is about past spending. It's not. It's to enable him to engage in the future spending that he wants, and that's what we've got to curtail. We absolutely have to have this fight over the debt limit.
Sam Stein, jump in.
Well, I quibble with the idea that you just wouldn't cut the grass, but I wanted to ask about another aspect of what happened yesterday. I got my hands on the actual legislative language of the bill yesterday afternoon, and it bore me to death, and there's no way I could even read through it without falling asleep. I'm wondering, did you actually read the legislative language of the bill before voting on it? And how many of your colleagues do you think actually read the bill before voting on it?
My staff and I were pouring through it, and we're looking at it section by section.
Do you think that it's a problem that lawmakers are getting about maybe 10 hours tops of lead time to look through legislation and then vote on it?
Look, this is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. But I would argue this goes back to the dysfunctional Senate that we have largely. I mean, the House passed a budget the last 2 years, and I think and Senate Republicans have put budgets on the Senate floor. If any one of them were operative, we'd be on a sustainable path right now. But Senator Reid and the Democratic majority think that it's acceptable not to even have a budget. So we have no budget. We don't do any appropriation bills. Not one appropriation bill was brought to the Senate floor this whole year. So we have this totally dysfunctional Senate, therefore a dysfunctional Congress, and then no wonder our back's up against the wall at midnight and we get some kind of, this terrible deal that's thrown in our laps that nobody's had enough chance to look at. It's because we haven't gone through a proper, sensible process in the first place.
John Cassidy, what does it take to make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that strikes me about this whole thing is yesterday we had the Liberals furious about it, Tom Harkin and people. Today we got the right-wing Republicans furious. I mean, it's classic Obama. He's taken the two extremes, he's cut right down the middle. So he's not getting any praise from any of the real sort of networks or the
let's just be clear.
That's what he does. And it's too early to say how it's all going to play out.
Yeah,
the president has his trophy. He's got the tax increase that current law gave him. That solves about 6% of the deficit problem over the next 10 years. Congratulations, Mr. President. Could we finally begin to address the 94% of the problem that some of us and Republicans have been talking about for a long time?
Well,
this president wants nothing to do with that. We've got to force that discussion on whatever vehicle we can.
Pat, Chris Van Hollen says we need to raise taxes more.
And he's totally wrong. We're totally done. You can't solve this problem. I don't care how much you raise taxes. You know that. I know that. We will only solve this problem when we finally get the spending under control, and the debt ceiling, and after that the continuing resolution expiration, those are the vehicles that give us the opportunity to insist on making progress on the real problem.
John?
Senator?
Well, as I say, I think we're running halfway through it. We'll be able to see a lot better after we've gone through the debt ceiling. I think the important thing we see there is at least some willingness in Congress to take us over the debt ceiling. And that's a much bigger deal than the fiscal cliff. Because if we saw in 2010 when the stock market went down 16% in a couple of weeks, if there's a real possibility of us going over the debt ceiling without an increase, there could be a debt downgrade, as Mark said. There could be a big financial crisis. So I think we'll be much better shape a couple of months to sort of assess where we are.
Maybe there's more leverage there. Senator Pat Toomey, thank you. Get some sleep.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, well, listen, thank you. You and Dan and Paul Ryan go off and figure out how you can raise.
He's got blue chip Club for Growth credentials.
And they were shattered last night in a sad, hastily written. I'm joking, Pat. I love you. I'm just bitterly.